And we're live. Awesome. Welcome to Leveling Up Season 2, Episode 4, Game Mechanics. The good, the bad, the ugly. I'm VP Quinn, and this is our Chief Operations Officer, Josh. You can... well, here we go. That was a good opening. You can find high-level games on all our media platforms and social media accounts, from our Facebook page, conveniently titled High Level Games, our Twitter account, HLG_corporate, our YouTube channel, also called High Level Games, and finally our Twitch channel, High_Level_Games, all lowercase.
You can also find the Inclusive Gaming Network, which is the co-sponsor of Leveling Up, on Twitter at inclusive_games and Facebook at facebook.com/Inclusive Gaming Network. And you can also check out our website, which is appropriately called Keep on the Heathlands and has nothing to do with the Inclusive Gaming Network name. But there you go, branding.
We have a Patreon page wherein you can support the many blog creators that make stuff for highlevelgames.ca. Find it at patreon.com/highlevel. For only $1 a month, you can get access to our content free as we release it. That includes our latest product, Beckett's Vampire Folio, Volume 1. Karna's Rebellion, a product that gives stats and background for the NPCs in Beckett's Jihad Diary, chapter by chapter, which you can find on storytellersvault.com. You can also find our new product called Kumari Nights, a one-page adventure released in 5th edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, and soon to be released in 13th Age.
Wow. We are just streaming out the products day by day.
Mm-hmm.
The other product that we have coming out very, very soon is High Level Games Con. Yes, we have gone crazy, and we are running a convention in Atlantic City in October 12th through the 14th, 2018, in the Showboat Hotel. And I'm going to tell you that the Showboat Hotel includes a room, includes several rooms, includes a lot of space, but includes a room called the Foundation Room, which is a beautiful multi-room bar and lounge that is perfect for your LARPing needs. This is a space unlike any I've ever been in. If you're looking to do something that's kind of 1930s Prohibition era feel, this place has got it. And we are running at least one LARP called the Speakeasy LARP, run by the Geek Initiative and Tara Clapper, who's a friend of all of our organizations involved in making Leveling Up. This is going to be a fantastic event. Tabletop, LARP, probably some board games and card games. It's going to be exciting. We are putting together a lot of awesome stuff. If you want to go and check it out, it's www.hlgcon.com. For branding, we actually got it right this time, and we made it really easy to follow your URL. So hlgcon.com, come and check us out. So Quinn.
Before you go on, one of the big selling points for me is the price of the hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. How much? Which was like a $120 or something they're giving us?
So the deal we got with the hotel was that it would be $120 a night. And the convention fees itself are very affordable. We've pitched everything so that local artists, small companies can come in and get some space and be able to display. And one of the things that we're doing at the convention, because I'm excited about this too, because it ties into our podcast, is we're doing a Leveling Up project. And the goal of the Leveling Up project is for companies, for artists, for creators to come in and share some of what they do with the products that they make. So one of our things we're asking everyone to do is come in with a short 30-minute demonstration or workshop where they're going to be able to show people how to create some of the cool things that they create. So if you're a leather crafter, maybe you can do a short leather crafting sort of workshop. Or if you're a writer, you can do a quick writing workshop where you come in and say, hey, these are the 5 things that I follow when I'm making a one-page adventure. That's something that Josh could do. Anyway, so these are the types of things that we want you to come to our convention and give back to the community. You want people from the community to come in and learn these things and be empowered to go out and create their own game products as well. So we're bringing up the whole community of gamers. And we focused on making sure that this is an inclusive convention. We focused on ensuring we have a really strong harassment policy. We're going to have a very secure facility as well. So this is going to be a convention where everyone is welcome and you're all going to have a wonderful time, if I have anything to say about it.
Josh and I will both be running games at this convention. I think we'll probably both be doing some kind of workshop stuff. I don't know, maybe I can do something on, hey, so you want to start an online role-playing community? Say goodbye to your bank account.
Exactly.
No, but yeah, it's going to be very fun. Very fun. Very exciting. I'm hoping that a ton of people come out. A whole bunch of the people that are involved with writing for High Level Games, with creating podcasts on our podcast affiliate network, with all parts of high level games. Some of the authors that have created some of our products are going to be there. We're very, very excited about putting this together for you guys. So please feel free to come out. And I'd love to meet everyone. We're planning a couple of social engagements in the evening so that we can meet you and maybe have a adult beverage or two. Well, I'll be there, so 3 or 4, and we'll see.
And depending on how many people show up, I may be having several as well, though I don't normally drink when I'm around other people. So we shall see.
You don't normally drink when you're around other people? That has some dark overtones.
Yeah, I'm that guy that just, finds a small cubicle and drinks by himself and cries. Beyond that. So, Quinn, what's going on for you in gaming right now?
I'm doing a bunch of things. Right now, I'm continuing to play my upbeat Mind Melter in Savage Rifts Gen. And I'm continuing to run a Star Trek Adventures game that we are getting ready to release some actual play podcasts for, that we've been streaming on Twitch and putting up on our Patreon page and YouTube and stuff. Coming out of that, we've actually started we released some stats for the Lethian species that are free on our Patreon page. Anyone, you don't have to even back us. You can grab that and use it for your campaign. I'm also running a Numenera campaign, which I've been really enjoying. So yeah, I don't think much has changed since the last time I've run, but I did go on a minor shopping spree today and bought a couple of Savage Worlds things. So I've bought like 50 Fathoms and I bought Deadlands. It is phenomenal to me that 90%, in my opinion, this is a very scientific percentage, of the really imaginative settings that are in the marketplace today all belong to one game. And I think that's Savage Worlds right now. I think there's really imaginative settings that belong to other games, but there are a ton that belong to Savage Worlds. It's incredible.
Yeah, I saw you were on there asking for suggestions on the group on Facebook, which I was like, Quinn's looking to spend some of his money on some Savage Worlds stuff. It's not a bad thing.
Researching a lot of settings and what makes a good setting. So
nice. I wonder why you're doing that. High level games couldn't be thinking about doing anything related to that ever.
We'll see. We'll see what the future holds for high level games and producing really phenomenal settings. Think Game of Thrones with anthropomorphic animals. Just saying.
Sounds pretty awesome to me. In the Game of Thrones, you either win or anyway, we'll leave it there. So is the next bit what I'm doing? Because I can talk about that.
Yeah, what are you doing?
I am doing almost nothing. We are playing one game very, very rarely at the moment, which is our Changing Breeds Werewolf the Apocalypse game.
Mm.
It's designed as a mystery game, a bit like a murder mystery CSI style game. So the characters are really digging into who is skinning all of these were creatures around New England at the
Did you
moment.
say skinning?
Skinning, yes.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So they're enjoying that. I think we're probably maybe 4 or 5 games away from ending that. It's a kind of short story, um, but it's very engaging. I think the players are enjoying it. A little bit different from the last Mage campaign we ran. And once that ends, we're planning on running Scion, which is a second edition. We're going to run Scion second edition using the story path system that Onyx Path has produced.
That sounds amazing.
Yep. And I'm trying to get a Pugmire game one shot going, but
I
that's
know.
been up and down. So who knows if that will ever happen, but we're working on some Pugmire related stuff too. We'll see how
Yeah.
that goes.
Very exciting.
Cool. So let
So
us die. Oh, so
go ahead.
all right. We are totally on the ball recording tonight, folks. So I hope for our one live viewer that you are happy to be here with us. But that said, let's talk about the topic of the evening, mechanics. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, specifically about experience points first. So, Quinn,
Yeah.
experience. What do you think about it?
It's fascinating. I mean, I have been so shaped in my view of experience points by years and years and years of playing Dungeons and Dragons that it's hard to think about experience points in any way than you kill the monster and get the thing, right? But as time has gone on, I feel as though that has a lot of drawbacks that I didn't see when I was younger, both for the story that's being played and for what's happening around the table. And it is interesting to me how they work. I love that in the prelude, I don't know, probably forward of Numenera, Monty Cook writes about how he envisions experience being given out in that system. And he envisions it being given out for discovery and exploration and learning new things. And so that turned a lot of my thinking on its head. In addition to that, a lot of games have been moving to non-combat oriented experience systems, right? Fate, you get experience for milestones. You kind of get an experience thing in Star Trek Adventures in a similar way. Even 5th edition, a lot of people have gone to the milestone system, so you get to a point in the story when it makes sense to everybody and they all just level up. And I think that there's good and bad to it. I think that Monty Cook points out that experience points are kind of the you know, the little food that you give the rat to get it to do what you want to do.
The psychological meat, as it were.
Right. And I get where he's coming from, because if the experience can only be gained through combat, what are even the most story-driven games going to always feature? They're going to have to feature some combat, right? And a significant amount of combat. And if they feature something else and that's how character advancement occurs, then likely that you can move towards that. In my Numenera campaign, experience doesn't happen through combat. In combat, very often I've noticed people losing experience because you can spend an experience point to re-roll a dice or something, right? So combat's not something that gets you experience, but there's still plenty of fun, awesome combats that are very cinematic and interesting and whatever, but they're not the point.
Mm. So let's back to that a little bit, because I think you're absolutely right, and I didn't want to derail any of that because I think that's all valuable framing. But I want
But
to go back to the beginning, as it were, and talk about why do experience points of some form exist? What are they doing in the grand scheme of things for a particular game? For Dungeons and Dragons, I think we can say the original idea behind experience points was story-wise, heroes become better and eventually take on the ultimate villain and destroy that villain. Would you agree or disagree with that?
yeah, I think that that's what they're for. There's a character progression that's mechanical, right? And so mechanically, you become better. I mean, it's often been said that Dungeons and Dragons is not so much a medieval fantasy game as much as it is a superhero game set in a medieval fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that your characters end up being able to do if you play for a while are beyond the ken of mortal people, right?
Right.
And
They're extreme.
yeah, and but it gives this mechanical thing, and I mean to the genius of Arneson and Gygax, we need to remember that a game wherein you play a single being and that being progresses mechanically was not a thing before they came up with it. And
Well, that's not a single person.
yes,
Yes. But units in the various types of military games did gain experience in some
yes,
systems. So the idea was there. I think bringing it down to the individual level is important. Um, but I want to just make sure we frame that effectively.
sure. And it is interesting that I think that we've been colored or shaded. I often talk about having a D&D hangover. I love D&D, and I will always love D&D, and it's certainly where my heart lives in a lot of ways. But I found that it's difficult in the role playing game space to be innovative beyond kind of the rules that have been set. It's kind of like in the fantasy genre. Tolkien kind of invented the fantasy genre as we know it today. And so you can basically separate fantasy into like Tolkien or not like Tolkien, but he is the rules. And I think D&D kind of establishes that framework to such a great extent that I know that sometimes I have difficulty when playing a new game um, because I'm like, okay, I have to think in a whole new way.
Mm. And I think that's really important. I think that's kind of the essential element that we were talking about in planning this episode about how to talk about this is that um, experience points and experience systems, whatever that is, reflect something at the core of the system. And they
Mm-hmm.
effectively tell you what the goals of the system, what the goals of the setting, what the player goals are going to have to be. And we've danced around that already a couple of times with the idea of being the storyteller, game master, DM, whatever word you want to use for them, has to create the right sort of conflict for players to be able to progress. And mechanically, how that is done is incredibly important to the type of story that you craft around those mechanics. For example, all of the White Wolf games behind me, one of the main things they focused on was role playing. And you
Mm-hmm.
got extra points for role playing. You got
Mm-hmm.
extra points for succeeding at certain tasks in a certain night. You generally were supposed to get between 3 and 4 experience points per game, which is a very slow progression compared to D&D where though the number systems are drastically different, in D&D you go out and you kill monsters or you fulfill quests and you get experience points in fairly large amounts, and you progress quickly through that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think from a mechanic standpoint, when you're saying we want story, so we reward story, whatever that looks like, that's why you get experience points in these types of games. Okay, that's the type of thing you want to push people to be that dramatic weirdo at the table going, I feel the pathos of what I've been doing. Not that I've ever done that.
Oh,
Um,
no.
right. And in D&D, if you're conquering the monsters and defeating them, then essentially that's what you're getting your experience for. And that's fine because that's kind of what the mechanic of the game has been. Like you said, until recently, fifth edition, some of fourth edition tried to shift some of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I mean, I just to respond to the grognard in my head. Um, I am your people. I get it. You're right now yelling at the speaker, going, but in my game, I gave role playing bonuses in D&D or in whatever system, right? And I did those things. Well, that's fine, right? And I did it as well. I also had a standing rule that's been going on for decades at this point that if you're not at the session, you don't gain experience, right? And so it kind of rewards people who can commit more to whatever you're playing, right? That's all well and good. Absolutely. And I think you should do that. But we need to recognize that for what it is. When we're talking old school D&D, that was a home rule.
Right.
And I honestly believe that it was such a prevalent home rule in so many games that that's how it made it in to things like Vampire the Masquerade and so on, because everyone's looked at it and said, well, this should be a mechanic in my game. Right. And I think that's phenomenal. I used experience to reward good role playing and good storyline. I use those things constantly as one of the tools in my DM toolbox. But in the end, it still boiled down to, am I going to get, as a player, more character advancement through exploring the political intrigue of my love triangle between the Lord's daughter and Sir Hulwith Jack Winter? Wow, that was
Character
terrible.
names that Quinn's never used by the sounds of it.
And or am I going to get it through massacring a tribe of ogres, right?
And that's, I think, the thing is that the systems give you a specific amount of experience that you're supposed to give out for those combat things. I know as a player, I can look it up and know, if I kill 700 orcs, this is how much experience points I'm going to get. If I do this bizarre love thing where Quinn acts like, this guy and this woman, and then I have to get uncomfortable for a little while, I don't know how much experience points I'm going to get. So maybe I don't want to engage in that particular role play because I don't know what the rewards are going to be. Whereas a system that rewards it, okay, I'm going to get rewarded for these things.
Absolutely. And I think it drives other story details without people even realizing it. Because when you're parlaying with the group of kobolds or something, it could have a 50-50 chance of you coming to a diplomatic solution or to a combat violent solution. But knowing that you're going to be effectively punished mechanically for the diplomatic solution does not help the character that wants to go out and talk to people and create allies and build a longer term storyline. It actually punishes that form of play.
Yeah. Which I've always found ridiculous. I've always said, if you defeat this encounter, if you complete it, you're going to get the same level of experience points if that's from, negotiating a kobold marriage to the halfling princess. Fine. That's, a potential answer to the conundrum that you're being faced. You should get the same sort of reward for that. But we know that systematically, that until more recently, wasn't how most fantasy RPGs
Operated. Yeah.
right.
And I mean, I think that in the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw something in game design wherein you definitely saw a lot more fluidity in what role playing or what was going to be rewarded in games, but it had kind of such a D&D hangover that it was just expected. I know that I have not played a lot of World of Darkness. The World of Darkness that I did play, even though we weren't necessarily rewarded for violence, we engaged in a lot of it.
Right. But I think that's from a setting perspective, it's a violent world. It's a violent setting.
Sure.
So
But
violence suffuses it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that we acted like a murder hobo sometimes with fangs, right? And I think just because that was role playing, that's what you did.
And here I have a great story that reflects off of that really well. So when I was in Germany, I was serving in the army over in Germany. I invited a couple of people to try their first role-playing game. They were friends of my wife. These two women had never played any sort of RPG before, and they were really into the idea of Vampire the Masquerade and role play in like a really theatrical sort of way. And one of our players was a guy, an old, a bit of a grognard D&D friend of mine that was like, "Hey, I want to play too." And I said, "Cool, come on. Like, I'm totally cool with this group." We sat down and we got into this story, and I put them into a scenario where these werewolves were attacking them. And the majority of people at the table said, "We run away," which makes complete sense.
Total sense.
If you are a human being that's never played Dungeons and Dragons or the Murder Hobo R Us sort of RPG.
Yeah.
The one guy that stayed was, of course, the Grognard RPG player who was like, "Oh, I'm going to fight the monsters that you set in front of us." And he died. His character died. His character was destroyed. And the rest of the table looked at him and were like, "Why did you stay? That's a little dumb, don't you
think?" And he's like, "Why did you back me up?"
Yeah, exactly. And they were like, "We're vampires. There's no reason for us to like fight these things and stay and get killed." And I think that just epitomizes what people are enculturated into RPGs might do versus the people that are like, "Oh, this is a story game set around drama. I'm going to do what a dramatic individual would do. I run away because that's realistic." Makes sense.
I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, another thing that happened in a big way in game design was there was a consistent systematizing of, you know, those kinds of interactions, so that you could protect yourself in a way from the capricious GM. Right. And what happened is that's when you started to see more and more of these mechanics for milestone advancement, right? That gave kind of a setup, but I don't know that it necessarily. First of all, I think that the capricious GM needed to change, not necessarily the mechanic.
Right.
But it's interesting to me because I feel as though the modern role player feels a lot less trusting, maybe, of their GM, right?
See, I don't agree with that. I think what's happening, and I think you can actually, if you track this back to the late 80s, there was this idea of what if these stories were not just GM-led top-down stories? What if it was a bottom-up thing? And there were several attempts to do story player mechanic pushed. I don't know the right term. There's a term that I'm looking for that's not coming to me, but player interaction with plot and world building around you. And you see this in games like Toon, of all things, that the
Yeah, yeah.
player has the ability to adjust and change the setting, and they have a mechanic for that. Fudge had a mechanic for, the player being in control of what the world does. Other games experimented with that, but D&D created this top-down model that people got really used to. But what we're seeing now is, again, that push to player agency. That's the term I was looking for. The players have agency, and the players have systems that they can now push against the world and say, sure, Mr. GM, that's what you're giving us, but I think this would be better story.
I agree that that is also happening, but I do think that my initial point is part of the impetus towards it. And I think you see it in every online conversation where you have, and I'm going to sound super old, but you have younger gamers, like gamers that started with like 3.5.
Oh, geez. young bucks like that, who are they? I don't know.
But younger gamers who will say things like, this happened in my game, I think my GM is cheating. Then you have gamers of my generation going, GM cheating? No such thing.
Sure.
And I think that in early game design, for all of its flaws, what you did see was that you had so much of what people were doing at their tables was uncodified. That they had to just figure it out. And so the GM just made call after call after call. Nothing worked the same way from table to table, and maybe not even from session to session.
Sure.
And that was, I think, a melting pot of creative awesome, but it also gave the capricious GM, of which there's more than we ever want to admit, a lot of power to screw over people's hard-won stories and characters. And I think that part of the impetus of what happened in that period of game design that came later was it codified a lot of what the responsibilities, roles, and rights of each party was in various situations.
Sure. Try to create a constitution for
That's a great way
for the social construct of the table.
Yeah.
If you wanted to create a political science sort of framework around it, but you're right. There is effectively a more codified, systemized sort of behavior back and forth that's been established over the years. And I think those two things that we both have mentioned tie into all of this.
Absolutely.
They tie into the mechanics that are chosen by the designers. They tie into the mechanics, the books that are created by the designers and the writers and everything to go, well, this is the type of experiences we have had, and we want to ensure that these experiences are done well. Maybe an appropriate word. It might be done in a way that we understand also, though, because sometimes I think we see games and I see some people call these like the more newer age games like Fate, and they don't quite understand or I'm thinking more things like Powered by the Apocalypse games that people are like, I don't really understand how the mechanics work in this and what their goals are. And I think that's really, it's important for us to understand when we're going into a game, the mechanics for this game work like this with these goals. It's actually something I try to talk to my players about, because sometimes they've come to me in games I've run and gone, why does this mechanic do X, Y, and Z? And then I explain to them, okay, this is, probably I get too far into it, this is the history of what this does and why this does this. And then they're either like, oh, I get that, or they're like, that's dumb, let's change it. And I go, okay, cool, let's change it at our table.
Right. Yeah, and I think when it comes to experience points, that kind of process is really on display, right? In that I don't want anyone to think that I'm like crapping on the D&D experience points system. I'm a big believer in people don't have fun the wrong way at their tables.
Right.
I've just noticed that there's different ways of doing things, and I'm enjoying right now various things. I do think that it requires a mental adjustment for the D&D hangover, and it probably needs to have a intentional calling out or something, or a naming of what's happening. In milestone centric experience point systems, I feel as though we need to go in understanding what is going to constitute these milestones, what kinds of things, because very often what can happen is, because the milestone is set at various story points, what defines that story point is then again left up to a GM. And if the GM has this same D&D hangover, it might not be clear in their mind when to apply these things. And so they might be applied at a point where everyone went, that was a story point. Or you might wait for way longer than anyone thought was going to happen. And, mechanical improvement of your characters is part of the fun for a lot of games.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and this has been something that the LARP community has been dealing with a lot, that people in long-standing games, chronicle games, or games that go on episodically, want progression. And as much as freeform LARP and Nordic LARP and other forms of LARP have tried to move away from experience, it only works to not have progression of some form if the game is a short session, like 2 to 3 days at most, where you burn through the story and then it's over. And there's no progression, because you don't need to progress in those things. You progress through bleed and through your personal experience, rather than some sort of mechanical sort of progression. And there's a problem with a game LARP-wise that goes on without that, but tends to want to go for long sessions for, a year, 2 years, even longer, because people crave some sort of feedback loop. And that's a part of the role-playing game experience. I succeeded at this task, which we see through dice rolls, but then I'm rewarded later on for that as well.
So you heard it here first, folks. Josh says that every LARP that doesn't do that system is wrong. And
that is not at all what I'm saying, because it's hard. There's no easy answer to that. And trust me, I have engaged in or seen thousands of conversations over the years where LARP organizers and LARPers go, this is what I want, but everybody wants something different when it comes to experience and progression. And it is the hardest part of a really effective LARP system, because it's hard to do in a way that gives people the right feedback loop and encourages people to take risks at the same time. It's hard. That's all I can say about it.
And there's also the probably the final point before we move on, there's also the problem of games that are designed with the understanding that you're probably not going to progress that much. I first encountered this with TSR's Marvel Superheroes RPG. Right? Go Face Rip. In those systems, you are front end loaded, right? And your experience point system is called Karma, and you can use it for in-game benefits and to do all kinds of certain things and increase your rolls. It's kind of a usable resource in-game, but buying up your stats, for example, is really expensive and hard to do, and it very rarely will happen. And people need to be comfortable with that. And one of the things I love that Supers game, and this is a problem that's endemic to a lot of Supers games, by the way, because you want out of the box your character to be able to do a lot of awesome things. But for me, I'm far more comfortable with just playing the character that I made if it's already awesome, and just I get my feedback from the story and the emotional impact of that story and all of those things. But I've come to realize that I think, in the minority. Mechanical character progression is very important and core to the role-playing experience for, in my opinion, the majority of players.
Yeah, you're right. The other side of that too, though, is that I think you would eventually hit a wall if those games went on for long periods of time. And by long periods of time, I mean a year or more.
Right.
If I created the Iron Mason, which is a character I created once in an Aberrant campaign, he was basically Iron Man, but he was also a Freemason, and he made that very clear in his Iron Man outfit. And
That's amazing.
it was great. He actually had his apron on his
Of course
Iron Man armor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was great.
I know the symbol on his chest. I can picture it exactly right now.
So, but I had this character and it was great out of the box. I loved how he was designed, and we went maybe 5 or 6 games, and I was like, "There's nothing I want to add to this character," and he's getting kind of boring in that other people are progressing and growing mechanically, and I'm like, I don't want to spend my points on anything. And I think that only gets worse the longer you go with that sort of character, where you're like, this is everything I wanted from them at the beginning, but there's not anything mechanically, at least, to add to them.
Yeah, and a big shout out to things like D&D 5th edition, who did realize that characters are the most fun to play at a particular level. Mm-hmm. And so you need very little experience to get to that level. You stay there for a bit, and then you progress past them very slowly. And I think that was a ballsy move. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the other things, and we're going to move into our next topic, is that 5th edition does a really good job of creating effective character creation in a way that makes me, it's not quite as deep as, say, GURPS or Palladium games sort of character background building.
Sure.
But there's a lot of nuance to the way my character's background can be created. You know, the idea of choosing a background. I think it's called a background in 5th edition.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Where I'm a noble, or I'm all these different things. Mm-hmm. That adds a layer for my character that I can say, okay, now I can conceptualize, not just I'm an ex-soldier doing blah, blah, blah. I'm an ex-noble that became a fighter because of these reasons. I've been given a little bit of flavor text just by having these things. Oh, and there's also a small mechanical benefit by helping me choose where my proficiencies are. So that helps me craft my character in a way that 5th edition, at least on the surface, feels simplified for the 3.5 D&Der, but then you go, oh no, there's actually some level of depth here that is not obvious, at least at first.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into our next topic, character creation. And I mean, speaking of D&D 5th edition, I'll echo those sentiments. I think backgrounds, they're not unique or new to 5th edition, but I think add something spectacular, especially given that I can randomize those things and then I'm forced to explain them, which sometimes for me as a player brings out some of my best creativity in that I can create a sour, awful, prickly, grizzled veteran of a fighter and then roll the acolyte background. And then I'm like, oh, he's also clergy and super religious. What does that mean?
Right.
And that for me is like, okay, so there's a whole, what happened to this person? And why is he like this? Is there this a family obligation? Did he have a really crappy grizzled veteran type life and then reach out in faith at some point, and this is something he carries forward? Is he a strange kind of member of the clergy? Like, there's just so much grist for the mill in that. It's
Yeah.
quite lovely.
I love that stuff. One of my favorite things from Robotech, which Robotech was my very first tabletop RPG.
You're
Um,
kidding.
no, I'm kind of weird like that. That was the
No,
first one
I
I
think
was
that was
into.
Joel's as well.
Yeah, love it. Love
Mm-hmm.
Robotech. The reason why I enjoyed it so much is I would actually sit down and just make characters by rolling on the random tables. And
Mm.
I know that all of my other like really like carefully formed character sort of gaming that I do in the background here is completely the opposite of that. But one of the things that I've always enjoyed is that kind of randomization, and Traveler does this really to the next level where you could even die before you're born. But
In classic, yeah.
right. But the idea that you kind of have to then construct a person around this framework that you're given, I I kind of enjoy that, and I like games that give you two versions. They give you the role randomization element, and then they give you here's a way to customize to make exactly the sort of min max to the concept that you have type of character. I don't use min max in a negative way there. I think you're smart if you understand what your concept is and then use your points to make your concept the most effective concept it can be, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, one of my favorite characters, I didn't get to play him very long, but he just sticks in my brain, is we're playing Marvel superheroes, and I took out the Ultimate Powers book, and it had a D100 options of random rolling what your character was going to be, whether it was going to be an augment or plant-based sentient plant or whatever. It could be anything, like a mutant of this kind or a werewolf or a deity or whatever. And I rolled it, and I rolled an option that was like roll 3 options and take all of them.
Oh, wow.
And so what I ended up rolling was undead cybernetic mutant.
That's amazing.
And so I was like, what does this mean? And so I was like, okay, here's what happened. He was a mutant in life. And then he was a soldier who received cybernetic augmentation because of terrible injuries he had as a mercenary. And as part of that, he had like nanotechnology in to help him with his healing. And he died on a mission. And
Mm.
was a complete scrub, and everyone pulled out, and he woke up later. And so he's wrong now. He's undead, but he's technologically undead. And then I ran with it, and he was that universe's in-universe Cable.
Mm.
And so I played this character. It was a blast trying to figure out how these weird things came up. I also once in the Ultimate Powers book randomly rolled a sentient plant and made a Wolverine anti-hero that was like an eggplant.
Yeah,
But
sometimes you go too far.
yeah.
But I think there's value to both methods of character creation, which
Mm-hmm.
basically say you can carefully craft, or you can kind of enjoy the experience of having a system guide you towards something that you otherwise wouldn't have played or wouldn't have considered.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to like a mechanic, again, a design standpoint, to look at it and go, our mechanics encourage you to do these things for these reasons. You know, the storyteller system was a very careful, customizable system because they wanted you from the beginning to create a character that you empathized with and
Mm-hmm.
that reflected something that you were trying to connect with. And you were carefully assuming both flaws and positive elements of your character concept so that you would be able to embody that and have some pathos from it and have some what we call bleed and LARP from those experiences.
And speaking to this, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to demand a yes or no answer.
Okay.
D&D, point buy or roll dice?
You said you demanded a yes or no answer?
Oh, wait. D&D, point buy is superior to rolling dice.
No.
Yes or no?
No.
I was hoping to like back you in a corner because I enjoy doing that because you're always so nuanced in your thinking that I really like it when I can force you to say, crazy things.
For sure.
But I agree. I don't think either is superior. I think they're trying to do different things. One of the things that I like about the old school roll your dice in order, leave them where they lie, rah, and then deal with it. Right. Is that I've created characters because of that, because I had to explain why a particular stat was so low or so high or weird combinations. And it's forced me to make awesome characters. I will never forget my character. Now, this is a lot of years ago. Don't blame me for the name, but his name was Merlin. Guess what class he was?
He was a fighter, wasn't he?
No. He was a wizard, or he was a mage.
But mage even. So
yes.
To age this appropriately. Okay.
Yes.
No worries.
This is first edition. But I rolled an 18 intelligence, and I also rolled I rolled a 17 intelligence, and I also rolled an 18 strength, but I was committed to playing a mage. And so I made, and he kind of had like quite a high constitution, like 15 or something. And so he's this big, burly, strapping guy who just happened to be a mage. So I had, 3 hit points and 1 spell. And I walked around with a great big broadsword on my back that I didn't really know how to use that well. And I would constantly portray myself as a fighter and not tell people I was a mage. And it was super fun because I was like built like a fighter. I looked like I didn't wear armor, but I was just like, that's because I'm so good. And I mean, it built up into way in later levels. I met a fellow character and a little bit of PvP happened, and we decided we were going to have a duel. And I was like, okay, your character starts on that hill. My character starts on this hill. My sword and abilities against your fist and abilities. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And so, the cloth dropped and he started running and I fireballed.
Right.
And I mean, I don't support PvP. Again, I was very young. My character was named Merlin, you guys. But it did force me into that. That being said, today, I almost exclusively do some level of, predetermined stats or point buy or whatever, because I've realized that most gamers today don't appreciate that. They look at a character with a flaw or they have a concept in mind and the stats don't follow that, and they see something that's broken and they see like they just see disappointment. They don't see a challenge or something to overcome or a new cool thing to explain. And that's not bad or wrong. It's just that I almost exclusively do that right now because the point of the game is for people to have fun, and making them play a character that they hate is not fun.
Right. What's interesting with that too, in that I think we see as another design mechanic option is the idea of flaws being something that we want to role play, that we want to engage with. And what some storyteller system games do, and what some other games try to do, is give you flaws, and flaws give you extra points to spend in positive places.
Mm-hmm.
And on the surface, that looks like, oh, well, this is a great way to engage people in playing their flaws.
Yes.
The problem with this is that sometimes it leads to people going, "Well,
Champions.
well, I'll take blind," and this is that same character that ran into that room with werewolves was blind. He was playing Samson that had become a vampire.
That's a cool concept.
No, it was terrible. But the idea that he was a blind ninja basically was what frustrated me. And
Samson the Ninja, of
yeah,
course.
and he only took the blind flaw because he wanted the 6 points from it.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I will let you do this because my story wasn't going to be combat oriented. So I was like, I'll let you think you're getting one over on me. And then of course I killed him a game later with these werewolves. But
Unrelated. Completely unrelated.
totally unrelated. But the idea that flaws give you something is potentially helpful, but you have to make sure that it's balanced against the benefit. If your
Right.
goal as a designer is to help create some role play experience, then you have to make sure you're not making people do it just so they get some other sort of mechanical benefit. Because in the end, that harms the goal of what your design idea is.
Yeah, where I've seen this really become problematic is Champions in the old days, now called the Hero System. I think it's out in like 6th edition now. I don't
It
know if it's
is.
actually in print, but it is in 6th edition.
Oh, I don't know
Um,
if it's in print either. I know I have like the 2-tome version of it.
yeah, it's
Crazy.
ginormous.
Yeah.
But in the old days, when you're playing Champions, creating a character required a law degree
Yeah.
and a lot of time, because the challenge of creating a character was how many flaws can I take to make my character as powerful as possible while still being playable.
Mm.
And it was interesting in that sometimes it worked incredibly well. I played in a Champions campaign with my brother William, where he played the Laser, and he was like a
Great name.
technologically based superhero guy. And he had cool, like everything was laser based, so you could shoot lasers and create like laser force fields. We weren't scientists, but but he did all these things. But like, for example, the force field couldn't stop all these different types of damage, only like certain types of damage, and it was only a wall. It wasn't like a force field that went around him,
Right.
and it worked most of the time. And when it worked, oh boy, it was awesome. But when it didn't work, it was funny because he would like put up a wall, people would just like go around it. Exactly, and you know, like all these interesting things. I mean, my first Champions character I based on a metal band that I really was into called Manowar, which is like
Fair enough.
yeah, a lot of loincloths and screaming. It's very brilliant. But they had this character on the front of their album that was this like over muscled barbarian looking guy, and I created him. And I got 80 points or something, so I put them all in strength, not knowing what I was doing, and took no flaws. And I mean, when I punched something, like basically it fell down, but I couldn't do anything, right? How I've seen the flaw system work a lot better, but not without its problems, is in Savage Worlds. Is not all settings in Savage Worlds are created equally, but in the base game, you have a lot of movement to create very interesting characters. The danger is that you get the one Munchkin player that's really trying to game the system in the corner, and that can be dealt with. But typically, the problem is that a lot of their flaws, which they call them hindrances, are story-centric.
Right.
Right? So there's no mechanical detriment. There are things you need to bring up in the story. And you need to be a Johnny-on-the-spot GM or have a really good table for that to work really effectively.
Yeah. there's that made me think of another game system that I tried out. So for years I played in a 3.5 birthright game with a bunch of friends of mine,
Beautiful
which was
setting.
amazing. We played for 4 years. We
Oh,
went from first level to mid epic. Like we were 25 to 30 when we
mm,
ended the game. We had gone
beautiful.
that level of progression, and it was amazing.
I had the box set.
Oh yeah, I love Birthright, and
Yeah,
the 3.5 fan created rules were actually really
very
good.
good.
Yeah. Um. Anyway, the so these group of folks and I tried to play the Game of Thrones RPG. There are two versions. There's a D20 version, and then there's a newer version which is D6 based.
Right.
And the problem with this, we discovered very quickly, is that if you create an expert in anything, you will always succeed. You will be always better than anybody else if you focus on one thing. And then
Mm,
if you are socially focused and you are that one thing, that you are the Cersei Lannister, basically, you will control everybody. The fighters cannot touch you because you will find a way to socially manipulate them so they will not attack you, which fits the world, but is a terrible role playing game experience because my two players decided they wanted to play fighters. They're both fighters that are ruling small domains. And I created one social character that was a semi nemesis of theirs. And I was just negating everything they were trying to do. So in the end, we moved over to Pathfinder because it mechanically fit more the story that they were looking for out of the
right.
game. I don't know
Yeah.
why your topic about Savage Worlds got me there, but it got me there.
Yeah, which is interesting. The always succeeding problem, because things like Night's Black Agents just assumes that your character is going to succeed at everything.
Right.
Um, and it works for that system. But it shouldn't succeed at the detriment to other players or the story or the game. So that's the problem there.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's true of I don't know if that game is powered by the Apocalypse, but I think it is, right?
um,
If it isn't,
Game
it
of
doesn't
Thrones?
matter.
I don't think so.
No,
I
no,
think
not
it's
Game
its
of
own.
Thrones. Not Game of Thrones. I meant Night's Black Agents.
No, it's not.
Okay. Anyway, but my point about Powered by the Apocalypse is it does the same thing. It assumes success, and
Mm-hmm.
by assuming success, player action success, there's no kind of contested roles against the game master, which is great if you're only doing player versus world
Sure,
experiences.
sure,
Where it breaks down is when you have player versus player action or character
exactly.
versus character action. And that's fine if your players will not do that, if you can be sure that they will not do that. But I've rarely been in a situation where everybody's always on that same page where they know there's no CVC.
Yeah. I so speaking of character creation,
We were totally down a different realm right
totally
now.
but speaking of that, um, it is interesting to me that I mean, most role playing games can be broken into two rough camps. And one is a stat based, class based system,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is a point by system, wherein you have a particular amount of character points like Shadowrun or Champions or Hero or whatever, and then you build your character by buying things, and other things give you back stuff. And this is where the hindrances conversation brought me to. Each has, I think, its flaws and its kind of bonuses, right? I mean, the point buy system is beautiful because you tend to have a very balanced table, more often than not, with exceptions noted. And you can really specialize your character. You're not beholden to be anything. My last Shadowrun character, I wanted to make a face, right? He was going to be the social guy and stuff like that. He was a detective. very basically a film noir cyberpunk detective. I really wanted to play that, but his whole thing wasn't necessarily investigation, though he could do it sort of, and it wasn't even necessarily that he was socially really, really good when talking to new people, but he always knew a guy.
Right.
Right. And I had spent probably well over half of my points on contacts. And so no matter what the situation came up, I always knew a guy. And that was who I wanted to play. A person that was comfortable in all these weird situations, had these weird friends, which hinted at some kind of wild backstory. Like, why does he know,
Why does he know a janitor in this,
yeah,
random
exactly.
cafeteria?
Yeah, he knows a janitor to this random cafeteria. And when he gets upstairs, he got the key from the courtesan who is, like it just,
Yeah.
who are you and what is this, right? And it was beautiful to play because it allowed me to do that. And class-based systems won't always give you your ability to kind of hone in on that one thing that you're going to be awesome at, because it builds you into a structure. There is in 3.5 and Pathfinder, for example, in class-based systems, a lot of room for personalization, especially if you, as you get up in level. But your personalization kind of is limited within the structure of whatever class you're playing.
Right. And your personalization is also potentially limited by the options of things that are printed in those sorts of things. Where then this happened with 3.5, and it's now happened with Pathfinder, that you've had to take all these prestige classes and all these things. These things are all out there now, but initially you start with whatever the core 8 to 13 classes are, and then you have to negotiate within those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is interesting to me because I personally think that I could play fighters, for example, for the rest of my life and never make the same one twice.
Sure.
But I'm applying this kind of template of my own fiction onto that fighter, right? And there's backstory and there's all kinds of stuff to make that character your own. But on a mechanical level, there's only so much I can make my fighter different from the next fighter.
Right. Especially if you only use a longsword in every single one of them. If you're a longsword fighter, human fighter, you're going to mechanically be the same, even if you have 10 different backstories for them.
Right, exactly. And it is interesting to me. I think that there is a lot of benefit to the class-based system. And I tend to prefer games that have something like that gives you a template and kind of like you make this your own, right? Because, and I think the reason is that first of all, it forces me to come up with some creative reasons and fiction around that, but also it gives me a direction. And I'm a creative guy as a person, but I often need a point of inspiration or a North Star to drive to help me to structure what I'm creating.
I resonate with that, but I don't need the mechanics to tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
So from my experience with it, I'm going to create a general concept for a character before I write up the character, before I actually sit down and do any of the paperwork. So that might look like I want to play Iron Man in a Supers game. Okay, now I know how to do that. Oh, wait, I want him to be a Mason, and these are the layers of stuff that I'm going to add to his character to make that make sense. Okay, so I'm using that as a guideline. Or I want to play a spy, or I want to play a swashbuckling noble was one of my characters for the Birthright game, which that basic concept then allowed me to go backward from that. So we're doing the same thing. You're kind of looking at frameworks to help you get to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting concept and then using the frameworks to build that.
Sure.
So I think that's fine. It's fine either way. I think because we're getting near to the end of our episode, though, I think what we end up saying is that play all kinds of different games, because then you're going to have different experiences with all of these different things, and you're going to get to figure out what you enjoy the most. Would you agree with that, Gwen?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in, as I said, you're not having fun wrong at your table. People have different preferences. I, as a person, have changed my preferences over the years. And even if I have a preference, sometimes it is instructive and really gratifying to play completely contrary to those preferences and see what that's like. I've had amazing opportunities to do that. So do that.
Definitely. All right. So let's go into the last sequence of leveling up, which is the "What are you reading right now"
Well, I
section.
forgot to bring the book, but I'm on volume 3 of Designers and Dragons, which is the 90s.
Nice.
You'll know that it has an Ankh on there to represent a white wolf on its cover. So I've just started that. I've also finished reading Predation, that was produced by Monte Cook Games, and behind me, actually. I haven't started reading them, but these were Christmas gifts I haven't gotten to yet. I'm about to start reading Empire of Imagination,
Nice.
Gary Gygax and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons, which is interesting to me. And this that I've wanted to read for a long time,
Oh,
which is
D&D and philosophy. Sorry.
D&D and Philosophy, with such essay titles as Menzoberranzan, A Perfect Unjust State. Expediency and expendability, an exhumation of morality, of the morality of necromancy. Uh, Berserker in a Skirt, Sex and Gender. Oh, beautiful stuff.
Wow.
Or Sympathy for the Devils, Free Will, and Dungeons and Dragons. Mm. Ah.
I wish I had the time to read that right now, because I would probably go out and buy it. But yeah, it's not going to happen. Anything else?
No, that's what I got. What have
Okay.
you been reading?
So recently I decided to go back and reread some Piers Anthony books. Found out some uncomfortable things about the gentleman recently, and decided I was going to revisit some of my childhood fantasy sci-fi books that got me started in the genre, basically. So I'm reading Incarnations of Immortality on a Pale Horse, which is about the incarnation death. And it's filled with misogyny to a degree that disturbs me. It's filled with borderline pedophilia, which disturbs me now looking back on it. Not things that I caught when I was 12 reading the book. Probably
Right.
I just thought, hey, this is what a 12-year-old might think about these things. And it's interesting as an adult now to look back on it and go, okay, this was a formative book for me. What can I still take out of it now and say is positive from it with the view I have of it today, which is
Oh,
difficult.
yeah, that's interesting. I definitely had that happen to me with a few authors, up to and including um, Howard, the author of the Conan series,
Oh yeah.
H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, all of which I encountered when I was very young and loved, much of which I still really admire and can be. Right now, I'm in a place where I can admire it and go, wow, that was racist AF.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Um, so I'm doing that, but at the same time, I'm doing a lot of reading for the World of Darkness stuff that we're putting together. So I'm reading and rereading Beckett's Jihad Diary, which I can't get out because it's so big. But it's a nearly 600-page book of setting metaplot material for the Vampire 20th Anniversary Edition. And I'm reading it and rereading it so that we can do those character sheet folios if people wanted to check those out, because they're awesome. But I'm it's interesting going back and reading and rereading something like that so many times in quick succession, because I'm finding little story hooks that I didn't notice before, and I love that. I love that aspect of a role-playing game book.
That's awesome.
Yep. So I think that brings us to the last thing that you want to say. Or is this me?
No, I can. That's me.
Okay.
All right. I do want to end this off by welcoming our newest members of our podcast affiliate network, these podcasters that have joined the high-level games community, Mystery Fantasy Dungeon 9000. They're up and running and doing awesome things. We talked about them a little bit at the end of the last episode, but check them out. In keeping with high-level games' mission to try and get as much attention as possible to awesome people producing great content, find them. They're posted on the website at highlevelgames.ca/podcasting network. If you are interested in becoming part of our podcast affiliate network, or if you are interested in writing for high level games, or if you are interested in getting help, either editorial or consulting help on your gaming products, send us a note on the contact section of our website or email us at hlgpodcast@gmail.com for further information. And this goes for anybody that is creating an awesome game product and would like to get the word out. We'll see what we can do and try to see what we can help you with. But try to do it before your Kickstarter goes live.
Yeah, for sure.
Because our writers tend to get their assignments, a month out. So it's tricky when you only have 14 days left in your Kickstarter to get something put together for you.
The other side of that, or other element that I would like to mention, is we have another new affiliate, which is Werewolf the Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're into Werewolf the Apocalypse, please check out Werewolf the Podcast. And the other thing is, if you're interested in coming to High Level Games Convention, HLGCon, you can email us at info@hlgcon.com or go to our awesome website created by Misfit Interactive at www.hlgcon.com.
I love that you insist on saying the www at the beginning of it. One of these times it's going to be like http:// www.hlgcon.com.
Well, technically HTTPS.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so we lost our viewer, so it's now up to us to end the episode.
All right. Well, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's level up.
All right. Bye, everybody.